Hi, everyone. We're right at the top of the hour, so we'll go ahead and get started. And want to thank everybody for taking time out of their day to chat with us. Today, we're going to be talking about how you can utilize Redis Enterprise on Google Cloud Platform to maximize the value of your GCP investment. My name is Heath Tull, and I'm a strategic account manager here at Redis Labs. Joining us today as well are Jake Angerman. Jake is a senior solution architect with Redis Labs, as well as Matt Cowger, and Matt's an enterprise cloud architect with Google. So just as a quick table setting for today's conversation, we promised everybody this would be a virtual lunch and learn. And to that end, as part of the follow-up takeaways after today's webinar, everybody that's in attendance will receive a Grubhub gift card. Also, to make things a little more interactive today, if there's anything that you learn or anything that you find interesting from the webinar, please share that in a public post on LinkedIn using the hashtag Redis Enterprise on GCP. And once again, that hashtag is Redis Enterprise on GCP. I'll put that in the chat. Make sure you use that hashtag if you share anything from this webinar on LinkedIn. That way we can find you. And everyone that does that is going to receive an additional gift from the teams at Redis Labs and our friends at Google. So for today's format, Jake and Matt will walk us through how Redis Enterprise on GCP provides you with a truly unified experience and empowers you to build enterprise-grade applications that ensure your desired business outcomes. If you have any questions at all during the webinar, post those in the chat or in the Q&A, and we're going to make time at the end of our conversation to answer those. So let's go ahead and get started. We all know that cloud computing is all about accelerating innovation and lowering barriers to entry. Successful companies leverage the power of cloud to enable digital transformation, provide better customer experience, and again, really drive their desired business outcomes. Redis Enterprise Cloud, in partnership with Google Cloud, provide really a fully managed and future-proof database as a service. As of today, Redis Enterprise is leveraged by many Google Cloud customers because it's really uniquely suited to handle the speed, the complexity, and the scale that are necessary to power modern cloud-native applications. So with that preamble said, I'd like to turn it over to Jake Angerman and Matt Cowger to walk us through how organizations are utilizing Redis Enterprise on GCP, what that looks like in practice, and why it's so effective in empowering their desired end state. Gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heath. So hi, everybody. I'm Jake Angerman. I'm a solution architect at Redis Labs. And as I talk about the partnership with Google and the offering on GCP, I want to sort of talk about the Redis Enterprise overview, just to kind of set the stage for that, to give you the context of what it really means for Redis Enterprise to exist in that kind of cloud environment. So everybody knows Redis. We are extremely popular. You know, we win Stack Overflow's favorite database, you know, many years in a row. And many people may not know much about Redis Enterprise. So I want to just talk about what we do at Redis Labs to take Redis open source and turn it into Redis Enterprise. So what we do is we take the core, you know, we take Redis and we take it from what you may think of as, you know, a cache or a session state manager, those sorts of things, and we add to it the operational tooling and the things that enterprises care about to turn it into a multi-model database. So you can think of Redis Enterprise as an in-memory, NoSQL, multi-model database built on open source Redis. So what does that mean? So as you can see here, this is a diagram of really what comprises Redis Enterprise. Over on the left-hand side, you've got the core of Redis. Those are the data structures that developers know and love. Those are the things that are built into Redis open source, things like strings and sets and lists, hashes, those are the things that developers use to build applications and really treat Redis like an extension of their RAM. And what we do at Redis Labs is we take that core of open source and we extend it with additional tooling and modules. So over on the right are some of the modules that Redis Labs has developed to extend Redis beyond the use cases that people might be familiar with. So a lot of people get started with caching or session state, and then they start to get comfortable with Redis from a programming perspective in whatever language they may be writing in. And then they start to see the power of Redis and how they can extend it. And these modules, you can think of them as additional modules that you can plug into the Redis engine to extend the first-class data types that are already there in open source. So these modules allow you to extend Redis in ways that you may not have thought of before. Things like full-text search, secondary indexing, graph database, probabilistic data structures, time series data, those sorts of things. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but those are some new modules, some data structures that extend the core data structures within Redis. And then sort of on the bottom there, you can see as a foundation is the operational foundation for Redis Enterprise, the things that people care about, things like scaling, enhanced high availability, geo-distribution in multiple cloud regions, the durability, et cetera, all the security stuff, backups, metrics, monitoring, all of the things that enterprises care about. And we'll talk about those here in subsequent slides. So that's really the foundation of what Redis Enterprise is. So let's take a look at the journey of a typical Redis user as they're, say, graduating from open source, if you will. So the first place that most people start off is open source Redis. It's easy to get installed. Developers love it. You can use it on your laptop. It's a wonderful way to get started, and it's best used for internal applications that may not be customer facing, or you have a simple cache, or it's a non-business critical use case. And that's really where developers get started with Redis. Then they may decide, okay, I need to put my application, in a cloud environment, and in GCP, you've got Cloud Memory Store. That's a basic Redis offering. You can think of that as open source Redis that's packaged up to be deployed within GCP. And what Redis Enterprise is, you can think of that as the top tier of getting the true 5 nines availability, active geo-replication, the security, the hybrid deployments, large data sets, advanced clustering, and advanced ops per second in terms of scaling. That's really where people find themselves when they realize that a basic offering just isn't good enough for their mission critical use case. That's really where Redis Enterprise comes into play. So let's take a look at some of the aspects of what that would mean. So this is showing 2 different deployment options. So over on the left-hand side, you would say have a multi-cloud strategy. And then over on the right-hand side, you would have, say, a GCP only topology with multiple regions, multiple GCP regions. So think about for a second just a single deployment of Redis, a single cluster of Redis. The high availability story there is that within a given region, you can think of it as sprinkled among availability zones if you wish, but within a given region, you've got the high availability that Redis Enterprise provides. And then once you use our active technology, you can increase your high availability such that you now have multiple redundant instances of Redis Enterprise running in multiple regions. So what does that mean? That means that you can actually do simultaneous writes to the same data, the same key, and have that replicate bidirectionally to all of the other regions without having complex convergence protocols or protocols that require consensus. So within a given region, within a data center, if you will, within a given region, your application is talking locally to a Redis cluster. It's getting amazing response time because it's getting that low latency experience that people expect from Redis, but then you're also getting that replication to the other regions. So whether you have a multi-cloud strategy, or you have even a hybrid cloud strategy. I have customers who are doing that. They have on-prem apps and they are slowly migrating them to the cloud. That ability to do that replication is, a key component of Redis Enterprise and why people like it so much. So that's what gives you that 5 nines. So Redis Enterprise has this active technology in the Google Cloud. It's not yet available, but it's coming very soon. So we've heard loud and clear from our customers that they love this feature. Our customers roll it out all the time. And so this is a way to essentially future-proof your application, because in Redis Enterprise, and this is really important, when you have an application that uses, say, open source Redis, and you want to move to Redis Enterprise, you don't have to change the logic of your application. You can just drop in Redis Enterprise, change a connection string, and take advantage of all of the goodness that's available in Enterprise you don't need a special client. There's no special commands you have to use. It's just a drop-in replacement. So it's very easy to get to that level of high availability with Redis Enterprise. Let's talk about metrics and monitoring. So within Redis Enterprise, we have built-in metrics and monitoring for all of the things you would expect a NoSQL database to have, reads and writes, hops per second, latency, memory usage, number of connections, all that sort of stuff. And this is a GUI. It actually looks a little bit different in GCP, but that's just from like a font and color kind of perspective. It's essentially the same thing, but this gives visibility into how your applications are performing and how your database is performing. And this resonates very profoundly with the customers that I talk to. I was talking to a customer yesterday that they're in the process of moving from open source to Redis Enterprise. And every time I show this, it really opens people's eyes, because they haven't to date had the visibility into how their application is performing. And the level of detail, like you can set up alerting and monitoring for all these different metrics. You can save it historically over time. So if you want to see how your application or how your data is growing over time, you can do that and use that for planning for additional growth. So this is really powerful, and this is all exportable as well. Now, we also have the ability in Redis Enterprise to provide a Prometheus endpoint, and that's good for integration with things like Grafana, Datadog, New Relic, that sort of stuff. That is also very powerful. So all of these metrics you can see natively within a GUI, or you can extract them as well. This endpoint exists in Redis Enterprise. My understanding is it's going to be available in the GCP environment, I think next month, but very, very soon. So if the default out of the box monitoring and metrics interface is something that you like, great. If you want to extend it, we have the ability to pull that into your own pane of glass, if you will. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the modules. So I talked about it a little bit previously. This is depicting all the different modules that are available within Redis Enterprise. And, at the top there, you've got the core data structures. Those are the data structures that developers know and love. And then you've got, these modules like RediSearch, which gives full text search. Streams isn't technically a module, but it's depicted there as a separate entity because a lot of the modules use it. And at the center there is Redis Gears, which you can think of Redis Gears as an event-driven framework that kind of ties the modules together. So you could start doing interesting use cases with Redis, like I want to do real-time inventory, but I want say a recommendation engine, but only for people in my social graph, that sort of thing. You can get really, really interesting use cases by stitching together these modules with Redis Gears and coming up with solutions to use cases that you may not have thought of with the default data structures. So all of these are available today in the Redis Enterprise Cloud offering on GCP, with the exception of AI. That one is not yet available, but the others are available as a pull down. So when you create a database and you want to use a module, you just have a little pull down. You say, I want to use this module, and you create your database. I want to talk a little bit about RediSearch, just because it's a very powerful module, and I purposely put in a wall of text there to kind of overwhelm you with all the different things that it can do. But what it does is it gives Redis the ability to be a full text search engine and give it indexing. So I have heard many times customers say, I love a key value store. It's super fast, it's super powerful, it's super easy to scale. The sharding model is really easy to understand. But I want to do some kind of searching across keys. How do I do that? And the answer in Redis is it uses this RediSearch module that does that. So what does all this stuff mean? It means it's really, really fast. So when you compare the indexing and full text search that's in Redis compared to the, say, traditional Lucene way of doing things, which is the way it's been done for 20 years in Java, this code is written in C, it's closer to the metal, it's very, very fast, up to an order of magnitude faster. So, those traditional Lucene-based search engines, they were made for an era where, I want to reload my product catalog twice a day. Well, times have changed and real-time applications need something a little bit faster than that. Twice a day updates aren't going to cut it. So we see customers using RediSearch for real-time inventory and augmenting their data with the secondary index that they have they can do powerful queries on. So it kind of moves you along the graduation process. Say I go to Redis Enterprise and I'm graduating to using this more than just a key value store. Okay. Another aspect of Redis Enterprise is security. So in traditional Redis, traditional open source Redis, if you have access to the database, you have access to everything. In Redis Enterprise, let me take one step back. So in open source, you do have the ability to limit commands, but it's somewhat of a heavy hammer where it's kind of limiting the scope of the commands to everyone essentially. In Redis Enterprise, we have access control lists with version 6.0 that allow you to finely tune who has access to which command. So you can say, okay, I actually had the same customer I was talking about before. They actually asked me this yesterday, we want our developers to be able to use the database, but we don't want them to run FlushDB. Can you do that? And the answer is yes, you can do that. So you can start restricting with access control lists, who has access to which data, what they can do to that data, et cetera, et cetera. And then over on the right, I'm depicting all the other stuff that comes, sort of out of the box with Redis Enterprise. We've always had encryption in flight, encryption at rest, a log of who does what. That's super important. People want to know in an enterprise, who's touching my database, what did they do? Can I authenticate my administrators properly and track what they're doing? That sort of control plane is available in Redis Enterprise as well. Next, I'll talk about big data, if it were. So as you can imagine, if you have a large data set, as you start moving from the gigabyte scale in Redis to the terabyte scale, things start to get expensive. Because if you have, say, a terabyte of data in Redis and you want to replicate that data for high availability purposes, you now have 2 terabytes that you have to take care of. And provisioning that much RAM and managing that number of instances to fulfill that becomes a little daunting and not only operationally challenging, but also expensive. So in Redis Enterprise, we have Redis on Flash, and this is available in the GCP offering, where you can say, okay, I've got a terabyte scale data set. I want Redis Enterprise to manage, say, keep my hotkeys and my hot data in RAM, and then the balance of my warm data in flash storage, and manage the movement of that data such that, as I'm accessing the data in my use case, I'm serving all of the hot data and the indexes out of RAM. And then if I need to go, fetch something in Flash, I still get microsecond response time. It's still great, but I'm spending a lot less. So in this particular example, here's a hypothetical example of I've got a 1 terabyte data set that I've replicated. What would that cost me from a cloud deployment perspective? And it's, over $500,000 a year. With Redis Enterprise, Redis on Flash, you're reducing the amount of infrastructure that you have to provision and manage. So you're actually saving up to 70% on these large data sets, just because you don't have to provision that much RAM anymore. Okay. So let's talk about the partnership overview. So the partnership was announced in, I believe it was April of 2019. Google partnered with a bunch of open source centric data management and analytics companies. So let's talk about, what does this partnership really entail? So in order to understand that, we have to kind of understand like how we got to where we are. Redis Labs started off as a database as a service. That was the primary way of delivering our product when we started 9 years ago. Back then, there was only, we had one cloud, but we've, of course, since branched off to all the clouds. And, we are essentially cloud native. A lot of databases sort of slapped a label on themselves that said we're cloud ready because we had to get ready, but our software was designed to be managed in a cloud infrastructure from the start. So in the traditional sense, you could use database as a service, where you have to go provision it yourself, so to speak, in quotes. But that is one way to do it. There's another way where you could actually download a tarball from Redis Labs, install it yourself and manage it yourself, or you could use our operator on Kubernetes to manage Redis Enterprise. So what we're talking about today is over on the right-hand side. So now you'll have a service that it's fully managed, it's integrated with the Google Cloud Console, and now you can actually click buttons and not have to worry about the mechanics or the management of all this software. It's just it's a resource to be consumed. Okay. So the interface is actually, as you would expect, it's very similar to the interfaces that you're used to experiencing today. So it's fully managed. You click buttons. I thought about demoing it for this presentation, but there's actually not that much to demo because you click next, next, next. You define a CIDR block. You do a VPC pairing, and then you click go, and you're done. And then from that moment on, you've got a Redis Enterprise database that you can consume within your projects. You can create more of them, multiple ones. You can manage it all with clicks of a button. You're burning down your GCP spend commit, and you are getting all of the benefits that we talked about previously with a simple interface. So the integrated billing is very popular with our customers. They like the idea of having, not just from an engineering perspective, like being able to click buttons and provision things quickly, it's great, but from like a billing and the mechanics of the finances behind it, you've got the spend commit, you're burning it down using this interface that you're used to using with all of this goodness baked into it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about use cases and customer success stories. From a popular use case perspective, here's some popular use cases that we see people using Redis Enterprise for. The first is e-commerce and retail. E-commerce and retail, that's high throughput, low latency kind of environment. You want to have as minimal friction as possible for people to be able to purchase goods from you. And right now, as a matter of fact, our customers, I can tell you they're already gearing up their load testing for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Like those war games have begun, and the testing is now underway to get ready for that event. So it's Redis Enterprise is used frequently in e-commerce. I've deployed a customer that uses it for product catalog, just because it's so quick to refresh. Traditionally product catalog refreshes is kind of like this batch process that you run twice a day. With Redis Enterprise, you just click a button and you can do it within minutes. So catalogs, shopping carts, those are very popular use cases for e-commerce. In financial services, this slide is actually outdated. It should be 4 of the 4 largest credit card issuers. So I'll have to update that slide. But the top 4 credit card issuers use Redis Enterprise. So high-speed transactions, session store, caching is also very popular, and also fraud mitigation is popular in that vertical. So if you need a low latency experience, if I swipe my credit card and I'm committing fraud, does it really help if that check takes 20 to 30 seconds? No, I'm out the door after that transaction is over. So I need a low latency fraud mitigation check at the point of sale. And that's what people in the financial services industry use Redis Enterprise for. Gaming is very popular. If you want to talk about a low latency experience, gaming in Redis Enterprise is also very important for session store, high throughput messaging, like messaging your team, leaderboards to know who's stack ranked. And that's a very typical use case where you've got multiple geographic regions. So if you're playing an online game, you're not just playing somebody in your region, you're playing somebody all over the world. And that performance is absolutely critical in gaming. And last but not least, IoT. We have a time series module. We participate in the EdgeX Foundry, and I'm seeing customers. I'll talk about. I've seen like healthcare customers that are starting to use these IoT use cases like Fitbit monitoring, gathering all the data from the Fitbit. Chatbots are also a very common use case, which can be powered by Redis AI. So I talked about retail, I talked about gaming, but I wanted to just kind of paint the broad breadth here of other verticals. So we're used in many verticals, not just the four use cases that I listed before. I can probably name, with the exception of maybe not with the exception of government, I can name companies, each one of these verticals that use Redis that I personally use every day in my life. I know Roblox is very popular in my household during this time. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Matt, and Matt Cowger is going to talk about one of his customer use cases using Redis Enterprise on GCP.
Hey guys, my name is Matt. Like Jake said, I am a cloud architect here at Google. One of the things that we really love is working with our Google Cloud customers, but finding them solutions within our marketplace, within our partners that sort of meet their needs the best. I have one customer who is probably my single largest customer, is a telephony customer. As you might expect from telephony, the things that are important for them are number one, latency, number two, reliability, number three, latency, and number four, latency, right? So I could probably offer them any product in the world, and the first question they're going to ask is, what kinds of SLAs, what kind of response times can I expect? And so as you might guess from Redis, right, response times from Redis, and whether that's Redis Labs or Redis open source, are fantastic, right? Sub millisecond is a pretty common thing to see. But the challenges that they face are bigger than just, I need a low latency response time. If you think about sort of what happens, one of the things that they use Redis for is to control whether or not specific users are muted. Here when I am presenting here, I've got my little mute button in the bottom left. And imagine if I hit that button and we were talking about a 1 second response time to mute me or not. I'm sure that we've all experienced that with COVID and the pandemic and this move to more and more video conferencing. Having that mute button on at just the right time when your kid walks in the room while you're presenting is a really valuable opportunity. I thought it was interesting, Jake, that you mentioned sort of the spikes and e-commerce spikes that are coming for Black Friday, because this customer of mine, their spike was not on Black Friday. Their spike was March 13th when California sent everybody home. They got no warning, no ability to prepare, and everything's working great. Even more interestingly, because they are a conferencing company, just like we started this webinar at 10 a.m. on the dot, they start everyone's conferences at 10 a.m., 10:30, 11, 11:30 a.m. So what they get is huge spikes on the hour, on the half hour, basically all during the business day. And so they can't really, it doesn't make any sense for them to shut things down and then turn things up. What they need is something that is online all the time, ready to be responsive at a low cost. And for them, that really was a great spot for Redis and Redis Enterprise. Some of the other things that were really particularly valuable to them, and I noticed a question here in the chat around what's the difference between the GCP sort of native solution for this, which is called Memory Store, and Redis Labs Enterprise. And there's a fair amount here that's different. Memory Store is a great product. It's reliable. It does work, but it is not all of those extra things that Jake mentioned, right? It doesn't have the RediSearch capability. It doesn't have the time series capabilities. One of the things that some of my customers are really wanting to see more of is integration into other platforms for things like monitoring. You know, Jake showed off the built-in monitoring that exists within the GCP marketplace version of Redis Labs Enterprise, but also the ability for example, to use Prometheus and Grafana, which we have tons of customers that use, and they're great tools. So one of the other challenges that my customer had was really integrating whatever they were going to use into their monitoring platform. For them, the best solution for that was Redis Labs Enterprise over Memory Store. And then the last thing that I think is really going to become valuable for them, and they're already asking me about, Jake, maybe we'll talk later about trying to get them into a beta, but they're really, really interested in this ability to do cross-region active-active databases. As you might expect, you know, even the latency that comes from a single packet crossing from Australia to the United States and back is something that negatively impacts their user experience. And so they're really looking forward to the ability to have those cross-region, cross-world, even potentially clusters that enable them to, as you mentioned, just have a drop-in replacement for something that really is a fantastic experience. So for them, the ability to combine all of those things together in one product that, as really sizable GCP customers, allows them to further sort of handle how they're going to work with their commit within Google and utilize their discounts and all that other kind of stuff, means that the combination of Redis Labs Enterprise and GCP was the best option that they had available, and it's working out really well for them.
Great. Thank you, Matt. All right, before we wrap up, I just want to give a quick plug for Redis University. So for those of you who know a lot about Redis, or let's say you don't know much about Redis and you just want to get started, we have online courses are totally free for both introductory stuff, like introduction to the data structures, how to program in specific languages, that sort of thing. Or if you're a more advanced user, we have courses that will deep dive into things like RediSearch specifically, or streams, or using some of the more advanced data types within Redis. So regardless of where you're at in your journey, we do have Redis University at university.redislabs.com. I encourage you to check it out, take a few classes. You can do it at your own pace. You get a wonderful LinkedIn certificate that you can show off to all of your friends and your boss. All right, and now I'll turn it back over to Heath. Heath, what should they do?
Great, thanks so much, Jake. Thank you for that. So we've actually reached the portion of our conversation where we discuss the questions from our attendees. I'm going to be reading through these mostly in the order received. We've got a number of things where folks would like to double click on a couple of things very specific. But for the folks that are in attendance, if we don't have time to get to your question, please know that we're going to answer all questions via email as part of the follow-up takeaways that are going to be included, that contains your Grubhub gift card, the recording of this, as well as any other takeaways following this. So also, if you think of something that you want to ask after today's event, please email me directly. I'll make sure that you get the answers you need. So starting off, our first question from Ed is, will a share of the hashtag Redis Enterprise on GCP on Twitter be eligible for the additional prizes? Unfortunately not. We're gonna restrict that just to LinkedIn, and it must be a public post. That way we can find you via the hashtag. So please share something that you've learned with your LinkedIn network, and use that hashtag Redis Enterprise on GCP. We're gonna have some cool prizes for you there. So Jake and Matt, I'll let you guys kind of round robin this however you guys would like, but there have been a number of folks that have asked questions around what are the differences, and we touched on this briefly, but just to kind of double click on it again, what are the differences between Redis Enterprise and open source Redis, as well as the cloud managed versions of Redis, whether that be AWS, GCP, Azure, what have you. So if you guys could maybe run back over that, I think that would be a great starting point for us in the Q&A period.
Okay, so let me take that in somewhat reverse order. So the cloud, those public cloud offerings of Redis that you listed, those are essentially white labeled Redis open source offerings. So that, it's Redis open source that is repackaged and put onto a marketplace. So going one step before that in the line of questioning, what are the major differences between Redis open source and Redis Enterprise? So in terms of, from a programmer's perspective, there's no difference in terms of like the data structures. It's not like you have special commands or anything like that. It's not a programming experience difference. It's more of an operational difference. So some of the things that we do in Redis Enterprise is we make the high availability more robust. So we don't use the same HA mechanism in Redis Enterprise that we do in Redis open source. We've written our own HA solution. And in so doing, we make it not only more HA, but we actually reduce the amount of RAM that you need to achieve it. So we're giving a higher level of HA, and we're actually saving you money in terms of like how many instances you have to deploy. And traditionally, when you start deploying Redis and like Redis open source on a smaller scale, things work out okay. And then it's when you start to scale, that's when you run into growing pains. So you've got a lot more instances you need to manage. You've got HA challenges, and also your application can actually experience situations where, like, let's say data moves from one instance to another in Redis open source. Your application could ask for a key, and the response back might be, sorry, that key's moved. You've got to go talk over there. And that introduces latency into your application that you may not have expected. So that's like at a fundamental level, the difference there. And then it's all of the other things that we talked about, like the added security, encryption in flight, encryption at rest, role-based access control. The monitoring and the metrics is huge. The customer that I was talking about, I want to belabor this point because I know we have other questions, but the customer that I was talking to the other day, they were using an open source. They were used to using open source and the monitoring that came with it. And they were using a plugin that was very simplistic. And once I showed them, like, here's all of the other metrics that you can use within Redis Enterprise, like, oh, now I understand, I get that. So we do have, in the Q&A, I saw that Toby put a link to some of the other differentiators. You can go to redislabs.com, and that link will expand on that.
Jake, one of the things one of the really big things that I think I would add about sort of the difference between memory store and Redis Labs Enterprise is two big significant differences besides sort of the capabilities. The first one is that when we think about like failover times, Redis Labs Enterprise failover times, as you mentioned with the different HA technique, those are often sub 10 seconds. I've seen sub 5 second failover times. Memory store uses the traditional technique, and it takes around 30 seconds. So there are plenty of applications that can sustain a 5 second downtime, but not a 30 second downtime. And then the really biggest one is that Redis Labs Enterprise persists to disk, and memory store for Redis in GCP explicitly does not persist to disk, and it's not an option. So I think if you're trying to use Redis as a real database, which is an entirely reasonable thing to do, you have to use something that persists to disk, and that means using Redis Labs Enterprise.
That's great, man. Thank you so much for that. And just for we've gotten a number of questions specifically around the Redis Enterprise versus open source versus memory store conversation. And as Jake clarified, that is memory store is a white labeled version of open source. So as part of the follow-ups, we're sort of making a game time decision on this. We'll also include a matrix that compares Redis Enterprise to Redis open source. That way you'll have it right there in front of you in a nice little thumbnail that you can decide, hey, is this something that's right for me, Redis Enterprise, or is this something that memory store is better suited for? So we have a question around the Redis on Flash that you mentioned, Jake. To save that 70%, where does the Flash disk reside? Is it on-prem or is it part of the cloud? Not really sure how that saves that 70%.
Right, so the savings comes from not having to buy a gigantic instance with lots of RAM. So if you have a 1 terabyte data set, you'd have to go out and provision n number of machines such that the total amount of RAM, let's just keep it simplistic, totaled up to 1 terabyte. Well, you've got to go buy some giant machines to do that. But if I could say, buy a smaller number of smaller machines, so let's say I went out and I had to provision some number of machines that totaled up to 250 gigs, and then the balance of that storage is actually on Flash. The Flash is local to the instance, by the way. So that's part of the speed that you get. So you provision a file system that is, so Redis Enterprise sort of takes over that file system, provisions it so that it can now keep data, half of your, I don't want to say half, but it keeps a portion of your data in DRAM and then the other portion in Flash. So now you've got a smaller number of machines that have smaller footprints and less stuff to manage. In other words, you don't have to go out and buy gobs and gobs of DRAM, because DRAM is expensive, right? DRAM is a lot more expensive than a traditional storage file system.
Great, thank you for that, Jake. And we did have another question. I think we answered it previously, but just wanted to make sure that there was nothing that you gentlemen wanted to double back on regarding, there was a question that said the similar features are available in memory store. Any additional benefits that you would want us, i.e. the attendees, to know that they would get out of Redis Enterprise on GCP as compared to their usage of memory store? Just wanted, because we had that subsequent question, just wanted to make sure there was nothing that you gentlemen wanted to double back on there.
I mean, I think collectively, Matt and I covered it. So you've got the disk persistence, you've got improved failover time, and you've got improved monitoring and metrics. So, those are the things that enterprises care about. So those are the top 3 that stick out in my mind.
Yeah. Matt, anything else there? Or Jake, it seems like you guys have really worked it, so just want to make sure.
I would totally agree with Jake. I think those are my top 3 as well.
Excellent, excellent. So we are getting some asks for clarification between the comparisons between Redis Enterprise and Elasticsearch. Mm-hmm. Anything off the top of the head for either of you gentlemen on that?
Those are the Elasticsearch and their ilk. I love that word, ilk. They use Lucene. Lucene's 20 years old. It's written in Java. That was not designed for a modern, I need a response in less than 1 millisecond use case. That's great for catalog refreshes that happen periodically during the day, but if I need something real time, so let me give you an example. We have a customer that uses, they use RediSearch in a B2B context. So like if you're a consumer, you go buy something, your shopping cart has, some number of items in it. In a B2B context, you could have thousands of items in your shopping cart. How do you make sense of that as a business buyer? You need some ability to search through that. So you've got these indexes that are constantly getting created and destroyed, refreshed, added to, removed. That is not a use case that Lucene is really made for. In traditional search engines, you've got this classic trade-off where if I'm doing lots of reads, my write performance suffers, or vice versa. If I'm ingesting a lot of data and I'm re-indexing it, this new batch, then my query performance goes down. In Redis Enterprise, you don't have that problem. RediSearch eliminates that problem. So you can think of it as a search engine that's more modern. So it gives you that, that 5 to 10x performance increase while still giving you that really great HA story, that high availability story that Redis Enterprise is known for.
Right, the next question is, and I'm going to amend this question. The question was, does Redis support horizontal scaling without downtime? I'd like to amend that question to, does Redis Enterprise on GCP support horizontal scaling without downtime?
Yes, it does. Short answer is yes. So what you do is when you first create your database, you create it saying, okay, I have this, my data set's this big. I want to do this many operations per second, go. It'll create the instances and give you an endpoint that you consume. If at a later time you want to scale out, so maybe you've got some sort of surge event, maybe your ops per second is higher than what it used to be, maybe your data set is growing at a rate that you need to scale out, you can just go in and say, okay, plus, I want this much RAM now, and I want this much ops per second. And then the cluster manager will scale out the database, handle all of the migration of the data, all the while your application is still using the same endpoint, but it's not experiencing any downtime. You're not getting exceptions or dropped connections or anything like that. That scaling is happening automatically in the background, and your application is none the wiser.
Great. So there are questions around, let's see. Pardon me, we're looking here. So there are questions around what is the price for Redis Enterprise and GCP? How to purchase? And just as clarification on that, you can purchase that on demand just by going to your Google project, searching for Redis Enterprise in the marketplace. And so there's an annual price. The standard marketplace is a per hour per shard price, but there is, also an annual price. Your specific Redis Enterprise or Redis Labs representative would be happy to discuss that with you. So again, just for clarification for folks that are ready to take the next step just based off of this, you can purchase on demand through the GCP marketplace. There are also custom offer opportunities, annual agreement sort of opportunities. So we're happy to provide that for you as well. Get in contact with us and we'll discuss more based off of your specific needs. This is an interesting conversation. How would you compare or contrast or advocate the use of Redis Enterprise and vehicle simulation, where academic researchers prefer to use the message streaming through technologies like robot operating system?
Yeah, so the whole IoT, that whole field in terms of, I need a real-time event bus, that's actually a very good use case for Redis, because usually those events are coming in at a rate where a traditional, say, a relational database couldn't handle it. Because Redis is in memory and it has these data structures, like it has a time series module, it has a streams data structure. Those are very IoT centric, and also you can use those and other data structures for creating, message buses or event buses. So that's actually a really fascinating use case, and I've actually seen things like that happen in industries that I didn't expect, like the same kind of framework that I just described in like a healthcare environment. I've seen healthcare companies starting to adopt these kinds of event-based streaming and analytics kind of use cases. So I'll just kind of tie a bow around that. So Redis started off with that kind of model in mind. Like, I'm getting a lot of real-time data and I need to do analytics on it at the same time. And I don't want to have this classic trade-off where I've got an operational workload and an analytical workload that are conflicting with each other. So I think it's a good use case, very interesting use case. So we're happy to talk to you about that.
Great. And is there a data admin UI available for Redis Enterprise and Redis Enterprise on GCP as well?
There is. It's called Redis Insight, and it gives you the ability to intelligently view your key space. If you're using a module, it'll model the data in a way that's specific to that module or that data type. So yes, check out Redis Insight. Okay.
So this question is, does Redis Enterprise in GCP mix multiple tenant data in a single instance, or is each tenant running its own instance of a Redis Enterprise server?
So I deliberately skip those details because we're getting into the weeds now. But the answer is yes. You can have a multi-tenant cluster. So you could have a database cluster that has multiple databases within it, and each database could have a separate endpoint. And you could secure each one of those with a certificate if you wanted to keep people out of the database. So I always sum it up by saying you can have it your way. Whether you want to have, like, you know, one tenant per cluster and it's kind of this private thing, or you want to have, you know, multiple clusters, you want to have multiple databases within a cluster, you can have it your way.
Beautiful. So we've got a couple of recent questions on, will the recording and presentation be shared? Absolutely. What we're going to do is, as part of the follow-up, you will get a recording for this. Please share it far and wide. It'll also be hosted on redislabs.com. So you'll absolutely get that recording as part of the follow-up, along with your Grubhub gift codes, along with the Redis open source versus Redis Enterprise takeaway. And what we'll do as well is we'll go ahead and provide a copy of the Q&A. Our colleague Toby Ferguson has been doing hero level work answering the Q&A real time in the chat. So Toby, thank you so much for that. Let's see. Okay, great. Yeah, I believe that is all of the questions at this point. Folks, we still have 8 minutes left in this if anyone has any further questions. So let's see here. Going once, going twice, third time sold. Excellent. Well, great. Well, so I think we can give everyone about 8 minutes of their day back. Really want to thank you so much for joining us today. Just a couple of quick reminders again. If you learned anything new or found anything interesting from today's conversation, please share it in a public post on LinkedIn using the hashtag Redis Enterprise on GCP right there on your screen. We'll have some special gifts for the folks that do. In the next couple of days, you will receive the follow-up. That will be in the context of an email from the Redis Labs team. That's going to have the recording of today's webinar, the Grubhub gift code, the open source Redis versus Redis Enterprise comparison, as well as the Q&A from today, that the actual documentation on that. Again, thank you to everyone for spending part of your day with us. We hope you enjoyed our time together as much as we did. On behalf of Matt Cowger from Google, Jake Angerman from Redis Labs, my name is Heath Tull from Redis Labs. Thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your week, guys. Thanks so much.